now.
Dan, we'll put everybody on mute.
All right, so good morning. Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Kushner report for November and December. Robert Brancatelli here. Just wanted to remind you that instead of going to the website for copies or to watch the video, you go directly to the YouTube site, which looks like this. And of course, it has all the other videos that we've done over the previous, I think it's been 2 years, at least 2 years now. There's the URL just in case you need it. But anyway, you can just type in Fordham Road Collaborative when you get to YouTube. And with that, we have also David Gauci here is going to be talking about a program that we are sponsoring jointly with TILT, Fordham Road Collaborative, and Santa Clara University. And we're happy to do it. Both Dennis and David will be involved in that in the presentations. And so let's take it away, David.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. Yes, I'm very happy to welcome Dennis to the team, basically. And this is something that will take place 27th, 28th of February and the 1st of March. So a 3-day program at Santa Clara. The motivation for it is really the confusion and disorientation that's being generated by the global energy transition. And it's not just what the pandemic and the most recent Ukraine crisis have produced. It actually, I think we were confused well before that. That just made things worse. So the way that this program actually is organized is around 3 big questions. If we're facing disorientation, and it seems to be fairly pervasive, then what is it that we know from experience or from maybe programs of study that we think that we can selectively choose to apply in the moment to help us navigate through the confusion? That's number 1. Number 2 is, given everything that we may know from experience or from study, what is it that we have to recognize we cannot apply in order to be constructive? And then the third thing is, if there is confusion and disruption, then that probably suggests that we probably need to learn some new things. So what is it that we need to learn? And what skills do we need to sort of acquire? And the way that we do this is by using what we call a decision-making laboratory. This is the 4th generation of these kinds of things that I've been doing since the mid-1980s. But this is basically a model of a worldwide energy system that has connections to business decision-making, state policy decisions, technology, resources, and a whole bunch more. We turn the model into a simulation. And the platform permits us to help people to engage in what we might call immersive learning. So they can go through an experience of running simulated companies in this simulated world and try quasi-experimentation, try crazy ideas and see what the consequences might be. Can't hurt yourself, it's simulated. So you wouldn't do this in a real company where you could tank the company if you tried something really crazy. But in the laboratory, you have quite a bit of flexibility. So the way that we do this, and this is why Dennis is coming on board, is that we don't stand up and advocate any positions. We basically impart some ideas about basic concepts and maybe present some frameworks for helping people to think through confusion and uncertainty, and then let them try it. Our basic philosophy is that people are pretty smart and they actually can learn and teach themselves how to do things. So our role, Dennis and I, will be more or less as coaches, helping them, guiding them with questions. We, of course, know what the basics of the model are, and the participants will be learning as they go. So the way that this whole thing came about was through a collaboration of about 5 of us over the course of about almost 4 years now. It's a mix of people. We have an astrophysicist, a computer scientist, a chemist who is an EVP at a major oil and gas company, a learning systems designer, and then an applied economist, and that's me. So our whole point of doing this is to try to help people to become confident, critical thinkers to meet the momentous challenges of the global energy transition, much as it is. So that's it. There will be a webinar that will go into this in a little bit more depth on the 18th of January, which Dennis, I'm sure, will be sending around to you, the notice of it. And then the program follows at the end of February. So that's it. Thank you very much, Dennis and Robert.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, just as a point, just to emphasize, this is an in-person, it's a live event. So it's for those 3 days, end of February, and then first day of March. The webinar, which would be, I think we're scheduling maybe 20 minutes to half hour or so, just presentation, as David said, is January 18th. And so I would just say, if you're interested in this, please contact any 4 of those people listed there, or if you think other people whom you know might be interested, please send them our way, because this is we're trying to get this off the ground and to be something that's going to be an ongoing event and experience with and through Santa Clara University. So we appreciate anything you might be able to do to help us. Thank you. And I think that's it. Dennis, you want to take it away?
Yeah. So and by the way, what I do is when we have the video that's available for those of you that are not on the call as well as on the call, I'll have more information inside that link to the video. So you'll get more of an understanding of what it is. You'll be able to take a look at that. So I'd like to thank David Gauci for being on this morning. I worked with David at Deloitte and Touche. We've been working together since 2000. David is a former Dean of the Graduate School of Business at Fordham University. David is, of course, a PhD in applied economics, is also taught at Yale, and the guy is incredible. And he'll be on board with us to answer questions later about some things in the economy. So let's get started. So welcome to the Kushner Report for November of 2022. We're now halfway through the 4th quarter, and at the end of the session this morning, we'll be able to have a Q&A session. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about key economic indicators, the global economy, the domestic economy, mergers and acquisitions, and other significant economic news, and what's ahead in the remainder of 2022. And today we'll talk a little bit about the update on supply chain. So getting started, for a lot of folks that are new on the program today, what is supply chain? Basically, supply chain is defined as the entire process of making and selling commercial goods, including every stage from the supply materials and the manufacture of the goods through to their distribution and sale. And successfully managing supply chains is essential to any company that's going to compete in the marketplace today, whether you're involved in goods or services, etc. So an efficient, optimized supply chain is really already so important in the fulfillment of customer orders for a company. But when managed correctly, it can also result in much lower costs and faster production cycle, as we've seen in the past. Efficient supply chains work with effective returns process, and it has been determined that customers are 71% more likely to return to a company if the process works properly, and that's critical. And I'm sure those of you that do work with Amazon, you know how that works in terms of getting your goods back and forth. In terms of best practices in a growing global market, it's can be more difficult to achieve success. And you have to optimize, if you will, end-to-end connected supply chain that can drive your company forward in a very competitive ecosystem. So you have real-time supply chain planning. That is, connected supply chain planning can help ensure your company isn't just relying on historical data. You need to identify where technology can really improve your processes and basically to the end-to-end solutions. And then finally, you have to maintain a strong supplier relationship. That's critical because relationships are crucial to the supply chain, and these connections require a constant maintenance of two-way communications. So it's got to be bilateral and continual. Some of the parts of the supply chain have clearly improved since the beginning of the pandemic, but the complex nature of supply chains really means that companies are still struggling since the shortage of just one part can hobble a company. I'm going to mention that later about Ford Motor Company that has 40,000 vehicles sitting there because they don't have final parts to complete the transition and move it to the dealerships. And of course, getting the supply chains flowing more freely is really the key by the Federal Reserve, which will really help drive down inflation in the months ahead. Again, lower producer prices are really needed before consumers can expect much inflation relief. And if you shift the demand, for example, another gauge of supply chain health is really the index put together by the Federal Reserve and their groups in terms of looking at what's transpired. Since September, actually recently in September, we're substantially improved since December of 2020, which has really curtailed everything in the country. And there's a number of trends that are taking place, 6 specifically. And really, if you look at it, the government remains a strong possibility in the event they have to take an active role. So while they try to clear the path for shipping companies, they've really resisted in taking a direct hands-on approach. However, there is a possibility of government intervention in the future as global political events, rising inflation, and other hurdles could cause problems. And as many of you are aware of, the United States government is heavily involved right now in trying to prevent having a rail strike that would take place within the next month. So last year's shortages have really turned into this year's oversupply. If you go back to last year's Christmas, you may recall that there were ships sitting offshore outside of San Diego and San Pedro and Long Beach that had products for Christmas. And a lot of those products didn't get delivered until April or March or April of this year. So you're going to see an increase in supply of products in the marketplace for sale, in which you'll see a lot of good sale prices taking place to drive that inventory out. The labor market really isn't expected to improve. The labor issues have really plagued so many companies for the past year, and they're just prevalent. And it's having a major effect in the shipping industry. And coming soon, they're going to be adding some more ships into the process. So 28% of the current installed fleet is in order and just opening up to moving more containers more judiciously across the world. What that can do is lower the rates of containers. If you go back to one of my presentations not too long ago, I mentioned that at one time a shipping container went up as high as $33,000 when they were normally around $2,500. Well, that's coming down substantially, and that's getting under control, which is really critical. You know, overall, if you look at the global situation, we talk about climate change. Well, in Germany, the lower levels in Germany's waters are really impacting the economy, and that has to do with shipping coming in and out of their ports. But overall, things are getting better. So, you know, it's not quite the normal as economists have seen in the past, but as we get into 2023, we're looking at things improving, and hopefully by the end of summer, the latest by the end of the year, we should see normalcy taking place in that whole process. So what's on the horizon? Well, many economists believe that the issues will last until, as I said earlier, till the end or the midpoint in summer of 2023. That depends upon a lot of factors. So business leaders say their current supply chain issues primarily stem from global unrest, the lack of raw materials, such as in the housing industry, the rising price of fuel and energy across the board. So what companies have to do are the following. One, you've got to reduce the availability of materials in the United States. There's a slowdown, of course, in the new housing marketplace because of lack of materials. And then finally, there's disruption to public transportation due to the lack of drivers. And I've mentioned this many times that we need to have more truck drivers, and we need to have more people qualified to move products such as chemicals, such as gasoline, et cetera, throughout the United States. That's been causing us a lot of problems. So basically what companies have faced is the following. They've seen a decrease in their revenue. There was a necessity to take new financing measures such as business loans, et cetera. And in some cases, there was the inability to pay employees. And of course, they had missed rental payments on products and services. But going forward, we're going to see a new change here. We're going to see more strategic thinking going forward, as David mentioned earlier. What we're going to see here is companies are going to adopt new technology to overcome challenges. They're going to implement new contingency measures. And in many cases, we haven't done a good job of planning over the last 2 years because we weren't prepared for this. We're having troubles getting out of it. And then finally, we need to prioritize U.S. supply chain solutions. And then finally, the new environment-friendly supply chains have to take place. And finally, what's happened is we've all talked about this for years, just in time of supply chain. Well, now it's going to become just in case. The supply chains now are increasing the amount of inventory that stores have on hand. So that kind of gives you a quick overview of what's taking place in supply chain. So it is positive news. And if Ed Snyder was on board, he would tell you when he looks out over his home in Palos Verdes Estates, he sees fewer ships out there. It doesn't look like Normandy as it did before. So now let's take a look at our general topic today. So I'd like to take a look at today's agenda. Okay, next slide. So what I want to cover right now is I want to talk about the gross domestic product, inflation, unemployment at the federal level, unemployment in California level, and then also the price per barrel of oil. So the global GDP remains the same as it has over the last couple of months, projecting it to go out about 2.2% this year. However, predictions for next year are down to about 1.6%. The United States is projected to go out about 1.9 this year. Keep in mind, for the first 9 months of the year, we're practically flat between the ups and the downs. And then next year, we'll see a decline of about 1.7%. Now, inflation going out the end of this year was projected to go out about 7.5%. The news this morning, for any of you that were up at 4 o'clock, is that inflation came out in October around 6%, and then core was around 5%. So that's very good news. And that'll have an impact on the rate structure going forward. If we look at the CPI for next year, we're really talking about 4.4%. And it's going to be a while before we get it back to the 2% target range that we've had over the last several years. The unemployment level, it went up last month. It's the projections are going out the end of this year at 3.7 across the country, and then down up to 4.2%. And that's predicated us entering a recession sometime next year. And if you look at California, the inflation rate going out the end of this year is at 4.1, and then going up to 4.6. And again, that's the impact of the economy and being affected by potential inflation. If you look at the range of oil here, we look at West Texas Intermediary. Immediately looking at this, we took the range down now to about $110, and I'll talk more about that later as we go through the process. So let's take a look at the global economy. Inflation is at record highs. It's at 10.7% last month. And again, it'll continue to plague global countries throughout 2022 and 2023, with the expectation that global countries, remember this, the global countries will enter a recession before the United States does. That's what economists are looking at this point. Foreign currencies such as the euro, the pound, and Chinese currencies will continue to underperform going forward. And we'll continue to see weaker foreign currencies. And the biggest concern in China, there are 3 elements here. Number one is the currency depreciation. Secondly, we have issues with real estate throughout the country. And then finally, they're projecting having lower GDP. And if we look at inflation, as I mentioned earlier, it was at 10.7%. Go back one more slide, David. So the other thing that's interesting is that the overall global economy is changing. But if you look at in the United Kingdom last month, it was 11.1% inflation. And what they've seen happening here is that the prices for electricity, gas, and other fuels are up 90% in the last 12 months. That's pretty strategic. It's drastic moves in what they're facing, especially going into a cold winter. In the banks of England and Mexico, both raised their interest rates 75 basis points last month. And they'll continue to do that until they feel they can get inflation under control. Now, a brief comment about the domestic economy. First of all, what I'd like to say here is the following. Once again, inflation continues to plague the U.S. economy over the next couple of years before we see significant improvement. And the U.S. dollar will continue to strengthen in the months ahead. Our economists believe that the U.S. economy will enter recession in the second half of 2023. I believe that we've already entered that recession timeframe. And the labor market remains strong at this time, and near-term demand in the marketplace remains very high, but the general slowdown is starting to take place now, but companies still have very strong profits and very strong operating. Economists at this time do not see major layoffs in any specific sector. It'll be across the board as we go forward. And although we're seeing signs of things happening, Powell mentioned yesterday that we're probably going to raise interest rates 50 basis points, and I believe that'll take place on the 14th of December. Now, real US GDP, again, they're projecting it to go up a little bit for the last part of this year, basically because it's a holiday time frame. You've got Christmas and so forth, and there'll be a lot more goods there. And you'll see a lot of discounts taking place now, like on Black Friday and the following Monday in terms of the internet sales as well. Spending is outstripping income for the last 8 out of the last 9 months. We're spending more than we're taking in, and there's a real concern there. And basically, the spending is driven by unsustainable drawdown in savings and over-reliance on credit cards. And I'm going to talk about credit card debt later as well. And again, we're talking about economists impacting that the Federal Reserve is concerned about. We can't be the world market for currency. So our currency is one of the strongest in the world today. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the Federal Open Market Committee said this morning they're going to raise the rates by 50 basis points in a week or two. Now, if you look at U.S. sales, total retail sales, if you will, projections are we're estimating that sales for this time of the year will go up 6% over 2021, which is very good. And we expect that to take place. That'll be a good, robust season for Christmas. The other thing I wanted to mention in terms of credit cards, if you can believe this, credit card debt right now is the highest it's been in over 20 years. It's just on the verge of $930 billion. And so what's happening is after we get through the holidays, there's going to be some issues with people that are going to have to pay off their credit cards, or in some cases, you'll see lower credit ratings to people that can't pay off the debt they have on their cards. Now, looking ahead, basically, if you look at core inflation, as I said, at one point we're at a 40-year high. And inflation did come down, as announced this morning, that it went down to 6%, which is great because last month it was around 7.7. So that's very good news going forward. For those of the folks on the call, good news on Social Security benefits. The cost of living is up to 8.7%. So you'll see that reflected in January. And that's the highest raise for Social Security income in the last 40 years. The trade deficit essentially was decreased by 3.7 billion last month to 180 billion. It dropped a little bit. The good news is the trade deficit that we saw over the last several months between 80 and 90 billion. This month we saw an increase to 73 billion from 65 billion the prior month. And as I mentioned earlier, the initial sales in the holiday sales are up a little bit now, and we'll get more. What's interesting is consumers are beginning to spend more money on automobiles, furniture, groceries, and gasoline. So you're seeing spending ticking up in all different areas. Now let's take a look at the employment situation. Again, if you can believe this, we had another strong month in October. There was a creation of 261,000 jobs. However, unemployment went up by 3.7%. We'll talk about that later. The real thing to look at here is business and professional services has been strong for the last 24 months. Government added 28,000 new jobs, but health and education grows by 79,000. The two areas that really took a hit during the pandemic was leisure and hospitality, and that's coming back strong. Still a lot of restaurants, a lot of retail stores, etc., have signs out for people. They still can't fill jobs that are needed. I'll give you an example. There's a place called the Broken Yoke, which is in San Diego, my favorite place. They were open from 6 to 3. They're open from 7 to 2 because they can't fill the jobs to serve the tables and having people cooking the food. So that's still a problem. Now let's take a look at California. I made a mistake up there. There's a zero missing. We had 56,000 new jobs in October, but that's still 6.2% less than February of 2020. Unemployment was up by 4% in October. And that was over the September timeframe. The biggest issue, again, is the lack of truck drivers and the production and distribution of oil. If you look here just real quickly, the key was administration. Government had lost some jobs, and then you have health and education, and of course, leisure. And what's critical to California is manufacturing. We saw an increase here of 6,400 jobs. Construction, which is booming, we saw a little bit here. It's basically flat. They lost 100 jobs, but that's still very strong in the state of California. A lot of this is driven by the availability of parts and to be able to finish projects. The other thing I find interesting is that the mortgage rates continue to bounce up and down. A couple of weeks ago, the 30-year average fixed for 30-year mortgage was at 7.2%. Last Friday, it went out at 6.84%. So it dropped down a little bit, but still a lot of people are basically out of the market. They can't afford to get loans, if you will, to move into the areas that they'd like to live in. The manufacturing index, which is a real concern, dropped to 50.2 basis points. And in the past, if it's dropped below 50 to 49, lower than that, we're talking about entering a recession or in a recession. And the latest forecast from Wells Fargo is predicting that when we get out the end of December, it'll be at 49, which is not good. So that, again, that just solidifies the concern about going into a recession. Factory orders rose moderately, which is good news. We saw that increasing over the last 3 to 4 months, so that's important for the economy. Now, small business confidence levels has really taken a hit. Earlier in the year, we were up as high as 98, and we're down now to 77.7. Lots of concerns about the economy, high interest rates, inflation, and small business being able to survive in this time frame. Lots of concerns in that area. Consumer confidence also took a hit. Early in the year, we were about 111. We're down to 102 right now. And the real key is the 100. Again, concerns about short-term remaining about the inflation, also loans, business loans, credit cards, and so forth, and also the concerns about going into a recession. The good news is on crude oil prices, they dropped down to $77.94 a barrel, and that's down from $84 a barrel that we saw in October. So I hope that trend continues. And you do know that OPEC recently said they're going to continue to cut production. So we'll see what that impact has. If their desires are, they'd like to see oil somewhere between $90 and $100 a barrel. Now, the housing market starts took another hit. Single-family homes were down by 4.7% last month. And in November, the November sales across the board in October were up a little bit, but they were up by 2.9%. So if we look at Southern California, where most of you live, in Los Angeles, for example, the selling price, if you will, were down 4.2%, and sales were down by 6.1%. However, sales from October of 22 to 2021 were down 39%. So you can see the impact on mortgage rates. In Orange County, the same thing. We saw sales prices were down by 2.9% in October, and sales were down by 17.6% and down 38.5% from the prior year. And in San Diego, where I am, we saw the sales price drop by 4.3%. Sales were down 15.6%, and the average from 2021 was down 41%. So we've seen some real hits in that marketplace. And again, existing home sales declined for the ninth month in a row. So the housing market is still being impacted by inflation and pending recession coming forward. The good news is in construction spending, it was up again by 2.1% in October to almost $800 billion. So that's very strong across the country, which is good. And the area of productivity, which is something significant, and David can tell you more later about this, is that we saw an increase of 0.3 of a point in the third quarter. And also we saw an increase in output by 2.8% and hours worked by 2.4%. So we're moving in the right direction as far as that goes. Now, one of the areas, if you know, that we've followed for the last several months has been the company displacements. And for the first time this year, I'm only going to talk about, we have 22 companies that laid off over 1,000 employees. I'm just going to give you the ones that are significant. So Amazon announced that they're laying off 10,000. We have a company called Builders First Source, which is in construction, 2,600. Then we go down to Facebook, which dropped 12,800 jobs. Google announced they're laying off 10,000 within the next week or two. And then we have a company called Hewlett Packard globally, between 4,000 and 6,000. Peloton, which is, as you know, is in bankruptcy, another 4,000. And of course, Philips, 4,000. Seagate, which is a technology company located in Silicon Valley, 3,000. And Twitter, 4,400. And finally, there's a firm called United Furniture in Mississippi. They're basically closing down everything. It's been there for decades. That's 2,500 jobs. So you're seeing this thing taking place across the country in all different vertical markets. Now let's take a look at mergers and acquisitions. Even though interest rates are going up, we're seeing that the low rates of where they are versus where they've been in the last 20 years there's still a lot of activity taking place. There'll be a lot of consolidations and expansions in M&A world. Keep in mind that organic growth is really starting to slow down. In many cases, it's flat. The way to grow the business, especially if you're a publicly traded firm, is to buy other companies to increase your basis in the marketplace. So first of all, you've got a company called Vista Equity Partners is buying a firm called Nobear for $4.6 billion. It's an all-cash transaction. They provide training awareness. And what they're going to also do is take that company private. And then you have Medtronic is moving to spin off two businesses and focus on faster growth. So you're seeing more companies looking at their core companies to basically get rid of those companies, such as General Electric has gotten rid of most of the companies, if you will, that are in the appliance business. They continue to spin companies off. Medtronic is one of the largest medical device companies in the United States, and they develop a lot of products and services for chronic diseases. Johnson & Johnson is buying a heart pump company called Abiomed for $16.6 billion. And at the same time, by November of next year, they're spinning off what they call their consumer health business. They want to get rid of that altogether. The U.S. government took an active role here. There's only 5 major book companies left in the world, basically, big publishers. And what Penguin was trying to do, Random House, is to buy Simon & Schuster, and that was blocked by the government. So that's not going to take place. That's off the table. If you look at Walgreens, they're combining what they call Village MD and City MD. That's going to be an $8.9 billion deal. What they want to do is it's going to create a primary care platform with extensive geographical coverage. So this is a good move on Walgreens' part. For those that are involved in the area of consumer products, we're looking at Estee Lauder, made the largest acquisition in the history of the company. They're buying a company called Tom Ford, and basically trying to expand their marketplace in that particular area of what they do in the retail side. So a lot of activities are taking place. Other significant news is occurring. So first of all, FedEx is basically shutting down everything in its robot delivery program that's been prominent for a long period of time. They've decided to go back to more manual processes for various reasons. Now, Toyota is scrambling basically, and what they're trying to do now is make some strategic changes so they can compete with Tesla. And it's been a slow process for them to get into the market later than most of the other companies, and that's what they're trying to do right now, is to scramble and reboot everything. Automobile prices, for those of you who want to buy a used car, a new car, prices are coming down. However, they're still 30 to 40% higher than they were before the pandemic. A lot of this has to do with the new cars lacking semiconductor parts. So a lot of these have been on hold for a long period of time, but that is improving. I told you months ago that there's 7 or 8 new semiconductor companies being built, if you will, production facilities being built in Arizona, Nevada, and also in Columbus, Ohio. So we'll see more of those coming online, but it may not be until 2025 till we can take a more active role in building our own chips in this country versus relying on Taiwan. Ransomware attacks, since a lot of you know I'm involved with InfraGard, along with Dan Ruckman, which is the Secret Service and the FBI around cybersecurity. If you can believe, last year, there was, in 2021, we saw $159 billion in ransomware payoffs and downtimes. And for example, this is unbelievable. And it's basically, we're going to face more of this as we go into 2023, because the bad guys are on equal footing and they're winning in many cases. Dan knows, for example, about a year ago, Scripps was closed for 6 weeks because they were hacked and ransomware came up. To this day, we don't know if they paid anything off or not, but they were out of business for 6 weeks. So those people that had to have surgeries were on hold, or if they were critical, had to be sent to another hospital. Halliburton, which is that David is well aware of, basically came out with a statement saying that the exponential growth in the U.S. oil and gas industry is over. And most shale firms are basically returning their cash to their investors going forward and not getting into debt. Amazon basically, as I said earlier, they're putting a pause on hiring right now because of uncertainty, and the company will continue to hire critical skill sets until they see a change in the economy. Lyft, for those of you who use it, they just had a major layoff. They're restructuring the company. They've grown too quickly, and they've got some financial issues they have to deal with. Then there's a company called Stripe, and they're cutting their workforce by 14% on basically 1,000 people. This is one of the most valuable startups in the country, and heavily involved in high-tech types of activities. So that was a real surprise last month. I mentioned earlier about Ford Motor Company. There's approximately 40,000 vehicles sitting waiting for parts. And it's expected that maybe some of these could be out the door by the end of December. Now, this is something in terms of California. Well, California in 2021 lost 153 companies, moved their corporate offices out of California where they won't have to pay corporate taxes anymore. And there were 75 of those moved out in 2020. So you're talking about 230 companies moved corporate offices out of the state of California, which has an impact on the tax structure of the state of California. Again, the biggest concerns they have, again, is the same thing. It's high taxes and the cost of living and affordability to live in the state. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, I think Dave Eckert talked about this last month. At one time, it was at 714 barrels. That was the maximum. Right now, we're below 400 million. And we'll see how far that goes before we have to decide what we're going to do to replenish that supply. And then finally, you have a company called LG Chem. They're building a $3.2 billion plant in Clarksville, Tennessee. It's a South Korean firm. It's making its first major investment in the United States outside of California. And it's going to be able to develop manufacturing, create about 800 jobs. And some of those jobs will be worth over $100,000 a year. So there's a lot of activity taking place. So what I'd like to do now is open it up for question and answers. So everybody will be unmuted. So here we go.